When you hear the word tsunami, what pops into your head? For most of us, right, it's this incredibly powerful, destructive force, but it always seems to be happening somewhere far away. But what if the next massive one was actually set to strike right here at home? Well, let's get into it, because the threat is a lot closer than you might think.
Yeah, you heard that right. From the super rugged coast of Alaska all the way down to sunny California. And believe it or not, even on the East Coast, the United States has a history with tsunamis. And more importantly, it has a very real future vulnerability that most of us are just completely unaware of.
So, to really wrap our heads around the risk, we first got to understand what we're even dealing with. What exactly is a tsunami, and how in the world does it become such an unstoppable force of nature?
Now, the most important part of that definition is the phrase, a series of waves. See, it's almost never just one big monster wave. It's usually a whole succession of them, coming one after the other, and that's what makes them so incredibly destructive. And while these huge undersea earthquakes are the usual culprit, things like giant underwater landslides or even volcanic eruptions can kick one off.
Just think about that for a second. Over 500 miles an hour. That's as fast as a jet plane. Out in the deep ocean, the wave itself might only be a couple of feet high, so a ship could sail right over it and not even notice. But it's moving with this unbelievable amount of hidden energy. It's only when it gets close to shore, into the shallow water, that all that energy has nowhere to go but up. And that's when the wave just jacks up to its terrifying destructive height. And look, this is not just some theoretical danger. This has happened. In 1964, a monster 9.2 magnitude earthquake up in Alaska, we're talking the second most powerful one ever recorded, unleashed a killer tsunami. And it didn't just hit Alaska. No, its waves traveled down the entire west coast, causing death and destruction in Oregon and California. Even the 2011 Japan tsunami sent waves all the way across the Pacific Ocean, causing millions of dollars in damage to harbors right here in the U.S. And to really paint a picture of the devastation, after that big '64 Alaska quake, the small town of Crescent City, California, was just slammed by waves over 20 feet high. They didn't just flood the town, they literally wiped out a huge chunk of its downtown. This is the kind of specific, brutal destruction we are talking about. Okay, so we know this has happened before. The big question now is, where should we be looking today? Which parts of the U.S. are the most vulnerable to the next one? That brings us to America's most dangerous coastline.
And the answer lies right here, the Ring of Fire. This is this huge zone of tectonic activity that basically wraps around the entire Pacific Ocean. It's where most of the world's earthquakes and volcanoes happen, and since the U.S. West Coast sits right on the edge of it, well, it's sitting in a geological hot seat.
So the Pacific Coast is by far the highest risk zone, no question. But scientists have their eyes on one specific threat that is, frankly, terrifying: the Cascadia Subduction Zone. This is a massive fault line just off the coast of Washington and Oregon, and it is capable of producing a megathrust earthquake and a truly enormous tsunami. Now, the East Coast isn't totally off the hook either. A huge underwater landslide in the Atlantic could trigger some pretty dangerous waves over there too, and with very little warning time. All right, this brings us to the most sobering part of this whole story. What would a worst-case scenario actually look like for the millions of Americans who live in these coastal zones today? So let's just imagine it. That Cascadia fault that we just talked about, it finally lets go. A magnitude 9.0 earthquake rocks the entire Pacific Northwest. What happens next? In the minutes and hours that follow, honestly, the projections are chilling. According to FEMA, that's the Federal Emergency Management Agency, a major tsunami event in this region could lead to over 13,000 deaths, just an almost unimaginable number, with hundreds of thousands more forced from their homes. And here it is. This might be the single most critical number in this entire explainer. For many communities, especially the ones right on the coast of Washington and Oregon, that's it. That's all the time they would get, just 15 to 30 minutes. From the second the shaking stops to the moment that first wave crashes ashore. I mean, can you even imagine trying to get your family together and evacuate to high ground in that tiny window of time?
So, when you're faced with a reality that terrifying, the big question becomes, are we prepared? I mean, what systems are even in place to protect people? And are they really enough? Now, the good news is we do have a system. The National Tsunami Warning Center, based in Alaska, monitors earthquake activity 24/7. If a quake happens that could generate a tsunami, they analyze the data like crazy and can blast out public alerts through every channel you can think of: text messages, TV, radio, and those coastal warning sirens. But here's the reality check: preparedness across the country is really uneven. States with a long, painful history of tsunamis, like Hawaii and Alaska, they're actually very well prepared. They run regular drills, they have clear evacuation routes, and the public generally knows what to do. But in the Pacific Northwest, the exact area facing that massive Cascadia threat, public awareness and the infrastructure needed to save lives, they just haven't caught up to the scale of the risk. Not yet.
And this is really the bottom line from geologists and emergency planners. This isn't some maybe what-if scenario. The question is not if this is going to happen again. It's simply a matter of when. This isn't meant to be fear-mongering. It's just a geological certainty. That pressure on the fault line is building up day by day, and one day, it's going to release.
So what does all this mean for you? Well, it means that for the millions of us living anywhere near a coast, awareness is absolutely our best defense. It means knowing if you're in what's called an inundation zone, it means knowing your evacuation route, cold, and it means having a plan. In the end, the question isn't just whether the government is ready, it's whether you are.